So my name is Beth Wallace, and I work at the National Wildlife Federation as a Community Outreach Regional Coordinator. I started working on pipeline issues about 3 years ago when we had the largest and most costly inland oil spill in U.S. history right near the Kalamazoo River. Ended up impacting about 40 miles of Kalamazoo River because of delayed response and poor response. But I also am coming and talking in a very personal voice as well. I grew up in Battle Creek, which is one of the communities that was directly impacted by the spill. And I spent a great deal of time the last 3 years communicating with people on the front lines, Dave, Jeff, Susan, and Deb, who couldn't be here. Many folks are directly impacted by this one particular project. It's heart-wrenching to hear stories like Anne when you know that some of the lessons learned from our incident obviously were not relayed. And I hope that out of all the work that some of the folks here in the room are doing, we can hopefully prevent another Mayflower or another Kalamazoo River spill. So the discussion today is what drives safety. I work, again, with the National Wildlife Federation in the Ann Arbor office. We focus on Great Lakes pipeline safety issues, and we have a very direct connection to this area of the country, of the North America, which is Alberta. It's the Alberta tar sands, and we are one of the lead consumers in the Midwest in the Great Lakes of Alberta tar sands. Oil in the Midwest is kind of at an overflow right now, and so there's an interesting dynamic that's happening where they're trying to push flow or the excess to other markets, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But this has created a very interesting scenario that's playing out that has expanded my viewpoint from not just environmental destruction from Alberta and from tailing ponds in Alberta, but also for a human rights issue and a humanity issue. The common thread for Alberta and the Great Lakes, as I mentioned, are the pipelines that run all throughout the region. Those pipelines are, in fact, going through a pretty large expansion as we speak, and that expansion has heightened our concerns. Currently, the network of lines that I have spent a great deal of time focusing on, there's some there's some overlaps that are occurring but are not so obvious. One example is the Lakehead System, which is all across the Great Lakes. It touches every portion of the Great Lakes. That's why it's called the Lakehead System, I'm sure, and is under corrective action order because of the number of failures that it has had on the system. The corrective action order is live. I check it weekly. It hasn't been closed. A lot of the information that has come out of that corrective action order has not been disclosed to the public yet. All of those pipelines, almost all of those pipelines within that network are currently being expanded, and that is lost on me. This particular pipeline was obviously the failure was the one that opened up our eyes. Tar sands and dilbit are not created equal. NWF rulemaking petition is an example on how we need to make improvements. That the rulemaking petition is to try to distinguish a difference between conventional crude and tar sands crude, and that has been filed with both PHMSA and the EPA. They have acknowledged, but there has not been any real movement on that petition. The tar sand spill, as many people know, I won't go into too many details. This has been all over the news for some time now. It is very unique in the fact that when not responded to immediately, there are very extreme characteristics that not only impact the health of humans, but also impact the environment greatly, especially when it's in such a fragile ecosystem like a river system. There's a lot of mixing with the environment, and there's sinking, especially when it's in the river system. It sinks, it does not float. And these are the kind of points that have not been addressed since the spill and need to be taken up. I throw this picture into almost every PowerPoint I do because it does show a level of disconnect, a level of disappointment, a level of frustration for the people that live within a spill. This is a wetland, a very important wetland within the region, as along the Kalamazoo River spill is obviously heavily oiled during the event. That's what you see all in the backdrop. And the prevention for keeping some of the wildlife in the region was just not humorous, but it almost got to that point, sadly. But this is a plastic owl on a stick, and it just kind of shows, how backwards we are in thinking of response. And so I've mentioned already, it's not only a justice issue for humanity, it's a justice issue for wildlife, it's a justice issue for the environment. And the failure to maintain a pipeline and operate it safely is, sorry, my slides are going backwards, have long-term impacts, especially for tar sands pipelines. The submerged oil in the Kalamazoo River still remains. There's 3 major areas. In fact, the first impediment all the way to the left there, where it shows submerged oil, they are doing extreme construction in that location to try to remediate some of the submerged oil that is going to be there for decades. And they've removed a dam, which has greatly disrupted a community, and the transparency in that process has been minimal to none. But getting back to the overall point that this particular pipeline disaster has caused us to step back and look at what can we do in the region in order to improve pipeline safety and improve the way that the operators, the agencies, even groups like myself or groups like Pipeline Safety are engaging with the public and expanding that public engagement. And we started we wanted to showcase how critical this issue is in our region, and so we started to focus on one particular pipeline, which we feel is one of the largest threats to the Great Lakes. It is another part of the Lakehead System. It's called Line 5. We call it the Mackinac Pipeline. This is the Mackinac Straits. If you've never been here, it's one of the most beautiful locations in the world, and it's also one of the most precious because it is the conjoining point of both Lake Michigan and Huron, and it is the drinking water source for millions of people, and it is the backbone to Michigan's economy. There is a pipeline that runs here through this water. It's a 30-inch pipeline inland, and then when it crosses here, it turns to 2 20-inch pipelines. It was 60 years old, placed in this location in '53, and it was expanded by 50,000 barrels this past summer. To the best of our knowledge, this expansion has had very little safety improvements included with it. There were some hydro testing done of the pipeline, but it was not of the crossing. And I bring up this particular project because it has been incredibly frustrating in the lack of information we've been able to get about the integrity of this pipeline, and also the lack of information from PHMSA and Enbridge on how they plan to remediate this area in particular. This cookie-cutter approach to response plans has proven over and over again it does not work. And the fact that a lot of these expansions are moving forward before a lot of the corrective actions that have come out of the Marshall spill, the Mayflower spill, and even the corrective action order on the entire Lakehead system have not been implemented. It's really frightening and something we hope to have addressed. So I'm showing you these images of this pipeline, which goes underneath the lake. It sits on the lake bed. It suspends in some areas, and it's a river system. In fact, this is the pipeline that's covered in debris in some points. And we had obtained these images this summer after we were so frustrated by the fact that we could not get information about the integrity. We hired a dive crew to go down and just get some stills and a couple images of the pipeline. And what we found through that work was frustrating, frightening, and justified a lot of the concerns we continue to have. And I want to talk about my motivating factors. It's beyond this. It's beyond the spill. It gets back to what pushes me to do a lot of the things I do in my life to improve not only myself, but also others around me. And it's the generation that is coming up. This is my son. This summer we took a trip all across Michigan to make sure that he dipped his toes in every part of every Great Lake that touches Michigan. And it's my goal to make sure that he can continue to do that throughout his lifetime and that others can continue to do that. And so I do hope that folks will listen to Carl and his presentation yesterday on the creation of the Great Lakes Pipeline Safety Trust. I think it's needed in our region, and I hope that we can all work to protect a freshwater resource that the world should cherish. My ending point, Carl did ask me one quick question in lead up to this, and he's like, what has been successful and what has not been successful? A success is, in the moment that I became aware of this issue and started working on it, I felt very alone, like many folks that live through the disasters. I got to know the Pipeline Safety Trust, and then you form this bubble. And in the last 2 years, I think the public outreach and the public understanding and the public concern around pipelines and around our energy use has grown to such a tremendous level and has really started a dialogue between everyone, from public to agencies to operators. The unfortunate and the not so successful piece for me is that I still feel like, getting back to Carl's point, it's a one-way street, and it's not a two-way street at this point, and I do hope that we can all work to fix that.